It was another gray morning in Clearwater, a quiet town where everyone knew everyone. Inside the old diner on Main Street, the smell of buttered toast and freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air. Rain tapped gently against the foggy windows as regulars murmured over their breakfast plates. Among them, a young waitress named Mia moved gracefully between tables, refilling cups and balancing trays with practiced ease. Her blue uniform was faded, her shoes worn from long shifts, but her smile never failed. Despite the exhaustion in her eyes, there was warmth in her every gesture, the kind that made people feel seen. At exactly 8:10 every morning, an elderly man named Mr. Harris entered the diner. He wore the same gray overcoat, the same brown hat, and always sat at the corner booth by the window. His order never changed: black coffee, 2 slices of toast, and scrambled eggs. He spoke little, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted his cup. Some days, he simply stared out at the rain, lost in thoughts that seemed older than the town itself. Mia had noticed him on her very first week. Something about his loneliness tugged at her heart. While other waitresses left his plate and moved on, she lingered, asked how his morning was, checked if his toast was warm enough, even slipped him a free slice of pie once. What started as a small act of kindness soon became part of her daily rhythm. By the time he walked through that door each morning, his coffee was already waiting. He began to greet her with a soft nod, a faint smile forming in the corners of his lips. Over time, she learned little fragments of his life. Mr. Harris had been a teacher, widowed years ago, living alone in a small house at the edge of town. His children had long moved away, and though he rarely spoke of them, the silence in his eyes told Mia enough. For her, his quiet presence became a comfort. Mia's life was far from easy. Her mother was ill, hospital bills piled up, and her small apartment barely held warmth through the cold nights. She worked double shifts, studied in the evenings, and often skipped meals to stretch her paychecks. Some nights, she cried alone, wondering how long she could keep going. But every morning, when she greeted Mr. Harris and saw his grateful nod, she remembered why kindness mattered. Helping him gave her hope, a reminder that small good deeds still counted in a world that could feel cruel. Then came that snowy morning. The diner windows fogged from the cold, and customers shook off their coats as they came in, but Mr. Harris's booth stayed empty. Mia noticed immediately. She tried to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest, convincing herself he might just be late. But the next day, he didn't come either, nor the day after. Worry gnawed at her until she finally called the local hospital. Her breath caught when she heard his name, admitted after a fall at home. Without hesitation, Mia took her short break and ran through the slushy streets to see him. Mr. Harris looked frail in the hospital bed, but when he saw her, his eyes softened with surprise and gratitude. "Mia," he murmured, his voice trembling, "you didn't have to come." "I wanted to," she replied gently, handing him a small muffin from the diner. "You can't live on hospital food alone." He chuckled weakly, and for the first time, Mia saw what his smile really looked like. She promised she'd visit again, and she kept her word. Between her long shifts, she stopped by daily with small gifts: a flower, a thermos of coffee, a newspaper. Sometimes she simply sat with him, talking about nothing and everything. The nurses began to whisper about the waitress with the golden heart, who cared for a lonely old man. A week later, Mr. Harris was discharged. When he returned to the diner, everyone noticed how slow his steps had become, but his eyes were brighter than before. Mia hurried to help him to his booth, hung his coat carefully, and brought him his breakfast with extra care. Before leaving, he looked at her for a long time and said softly, "You remind me of my daughter." The words lingered in Mia's heart long after he'd gone. Life returned to its gentle rhythm. Morning after morning, Mr. Harris would sit by the window while Mia moved around serving others, occasionally stopping to chat. They shared small smiles that said more than words could. Then, months later, on another gray morning, something unusual shattered the calm. It was just past 8 when the diner's bell chimed. Mia turned, expecting to see Mr. Harris, but instead, 4 men in black suits stepped inside, followed by 2 lawyers. The sudden formality of their presence silenced the entire room. They approached the counter where Mia stood, her hand still clutching a coffee pot. "Are you Mia?" one of the lawyers asked. "Yes," she said nervously. "Is something wrong?" He gave a faint, professional smile. "We represent Mr. Harris." Before she could speak, one of the men handed her a sealed envelope. The lawyer's tone softened. "Mr. Harris passed away last week. He wanted this delivered to you personally." The words hit her like a wave. The sound of dishes clattering, conversations murmuring, all faded into silence. She could barely hear herself whisper, "He passed away?" The lawyer nodded gently. "He spoke very highly of you." Mia's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter and a folded document. The letter was short, written in shaky script, but full of warmth. He thanked her for her kindness, for the coffee she never forgot, for company she gave him when the rest of the world had turned quiet. "You reminded me that kindness still exists," he wrote. "In my final years, you gave me back a piece of life I thought I'd lost." Tears blurred her vision as she read the next part. The document was a transfer of ownership. Mr. Harris had left her his house, along with a small sum of money, enough to clear her mother's medical bills and finally give her a chance to breathe. When she looked up, the lawyer added softly, "He said you were the only person who treated him like family." The diner stayed silent. The regulars, who had overheard bits of the conversation, sat frozen in disbelief. Mia stood there, her heart heavy and full all at once, tears streaming freely now. She had never imagined that her small acts of care could change someone's life, let alone her own. That evening, long after the diner closed and the rain had turned into a soft drizzle, Mia found herself standing outside the old house Mr. Harris had left her. The key in her trembling hand felt heavier than anything she'd ever held. The house sat quietly at the edge of clear water, surrounded by maple trees that whispered in the wind. Its white paint was chipped. The porch steps creaked, but it held a warmth that words couldn't describe. She hesitated before unlocking the door, half expecting the silence inside to feel empty, but it didn't. Instead, the air carried a faint scent of old books and cedar wood. Every corner seemed alive with memory. Framed photographs lined the walls. A younger Mr. Harris with his wife, his children, and later, years of his quiet solitude. Mia walked through each room, running her fingers across the worn furniture. The stack of newspapers by the chair he must have sat in every evening. Everything felt frozen in time, yet oddly peaceful. On the small desk by the window, she found something that made her stop. It was a framed photograph of her and Mr. Harris at the diner. Someone had taken it one morning, when she accidentally spilled coffee, and they both laughed about it. He had framed it. The sight made her eyes fill with tears. She sat down slowly, clutching the photo to her chest. All those mornings, the simple greetings, the warm coffee, the small gestures she thought meant little, they had mattered more than she'd ever realized. To him, they had been a lifeline, a reminder that someone still cared. And in return, he had left her not just a home, but a message that kindness never goes unnoticed. As the sun began to set, golden light spilled through the dusty window panes, filling the room with a soft, peaceful glow. Mia looked around at the house that was now hers. The shelves of old novels, the coat still hanging by the door, the quiet presence of a man whose gratitude had outlived him. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Mr. Harris." That night, she sat on the porch, the cool air brushing against her face, and thought about everything that had happened. The world often forgot people like him, and people like her, those who worked quietly, gave selflessly, and carried their struggles alone. But maybe, she thought, this was what truly mattered. Seeing people, really seeing them, and choosing care anyway. The next morning, Mia returned to work. Her co-workers gathered around her, curious and kind, offering condolences. She thanked them, then went straight to the corner booth, his booth, and placed a small vase of fresh daisies there. For the rest of the day, customers who walked in paused when they saw it. A few asked about the flowers, and Mia would smile and say softly, "They're for a friend who used to sit here." From that day on, the diner felt a little different. The regulars seemed gentler, conversations softer. People began leaving small tips with notes for Mr. Harris, or paying for someone else's meal. Kindness had quietly taken root, spreading through the small town like morning sunlight. Weeks later, when the paperwork was done and the house officially hers, Mia moved in with her mother. The place became a refuge, filled with laughter, hope, and the smell of fresh coffee every morning, just the way he liked it. Sometimes she'd sit by the same window where he used to sit, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the rain fall outside. And every time she did, she felt his presence, not haunting, but peaceful, like a quiet reminder that love doesn't end when life does. Months passed, and one spring morning Mia started something new. She placed a small sign near the diner's front door that read, "Kindness served here." Underneath it, in smaller letters, dedicated to Mr. Harris, who taught us that one small act can change a life. Customers smiled when they read it. Some asked about him, and Mia would tell them his story, how a lonely teacher found a friend in a tired waitress, and how their shared kindness built a bridge between two broken hearts. It became a story that spread beyond Clearwater. A local newspaper wrote about it. People came from nearby towns just to sit in Mr. Harris's booth. Mia never sought fame or praise. She only wanted to keep his memory alive. Late one night, after closing the diner, she sat alone with her thoughts. The same rain that once fell on lonely mornings now sounded different, softer, almost like gratitude. She realized something then. Kindness doesn't need to be grand. It doesn't always come back in money or recognition. Sometimes, it comes back in the quiet way your heart feels full, knowing you made a difference, even to just one person. As she prepared to lock up, a little girl tugged her sleeve and said, "My grandpa says you were friends with a kind man. He told me to be like you." Mia knelt, smiling through her tears. Then your grandpa was right. You can change someone's whole day with just a smile. The girl grinned, and Mia knew the circle was complete. That night, she drove home to the little white house Mr. Harris had left her. The porch light glowed warmly, welcoming her like an old friend. Inside, the framed photo still sat on the desk. She touched it gently, her heart calm and grateful. The world outside kept turning. People rushing, bills to pay, lives to live. But within those walls, kindness lived on. Mia stood by the window, watching the rain fall once more, and whispered, "You gave me more than a house, Mr. Harris. You gave me faith and goodness again." And as the final light faded into the quiet night, she smiled softly, because in helping a lonely old man, she had been given the greatest gift of all, the reminder that love, in its simplest form, is the most powerful legacy we can ever leave behind.